Hello everybody and welcome to this session. Today we're going to be looking at the anatomy of the uterine tubes or the fallopian tubes. Now it's important to remember that normal uterine tubes are not usually visible on ultrasound, CT or MRI imaging. And it's often only when there's pathology that the tubes themselves become visible. Say there's an ectopic pregnancy within one of the tubes, or there's fluid or pus that's causing one of the tubes to distend. In this talk, we're going to be looking at a diagram to describe the anatomy of the uterine tubes, and then we're going to look at some normal and abnormal cases that highlight the uterine tubes themselves. We're going to start off by discussing some of the surrounding structures associated with the uterine tubes. Now, the first structure we're going to look at is what's known as the uterus. It sits centrally within the female pelvis. It's got a lower segment known as the cervix, and the bulk of the uterus, this upper segment, is the body of the uterus. The top of the uterus here is known as the fundus. Below the uterus sits the vaginal canal, and we can see the fornices on either side here. Then extending from the uterus, both on the left and right hand side, are the uterine tubes. They extend from this region known as the cornu of the uterus. Those uterine tubes generally head out posterior laterally towards the left and right ovaries. Now the ovaries are suspended within the pelvis or the lower abdomen by two major ligaments. The first is what's known as the ovarian ligament. The ovarian ligament extends from just below the cornu of the uterus on the lateral margin of the uterus out towards the uterine pole of the ovary on both sides. A second ligament, known as the suspensory ligament of the ovary, heads out from the lateral aspect of the ovary all the way to the pelvic side walls. This is a thin fold of peritoneum, and it makes up the superior lateral margin of the broad ligament, which we're going to look at later. So it's the ovarian ligament in combination with the suspensory ligament that holds the ovary in place. We've got a third ligament that I want to talk about, known as the round ligament. The round ligament also originates just below the level of the cornu of the uterus, more on the anterior surface of the uterus. It causes antiflexion in the uterus. It extends anterolaterally towards the deep inguinal ring and extends into the inguinal canal, then exits the superficial ring of the inguinal canal and terminates in the labia majora and the mons pubis. So it plays an important role in positioning of the uterus. You can see in this diagram we've cut open the uterus and we've cut open the uterine tubes. I'm going to close them up and show you the last ligament that is a fold of peritoneum wrapping over these structures here. It's what's known as the broad ligament. So if we think of a fold of peritoneum running around the back of this diagram here, I'm going to draw it in like that. This is parietal peritoneum, and it's the posterior surface of the broad ligament. The broad ligament, though, is a double fold of parietal peritoneum. It extends over these structures and wraps over the anterior surface of these structures here. We can see it like that. I hope you can visualize that parietal peritoneum wrapping over these structures here. This entire structure here is what's known as the broad ligament, and we can separate the broad ligaments into three sections. The mesosalpinx, which is going to run over the surface of the fallopian tube, so that's important for this talk, and extends all the way down to the ovarian ligament. The peritoneum that's covering the ovarian ligament and some of the ovary is what's known as the mesovarium, and below that, the largest and broadest part of the broad ligament is what's known as the mesometrium. It's got the round ligament within it here. The broad ligament also contains the blood supply to the ovary, to the uterus, and to the tubes themselves. You can see that the lateral aspects of the ovary and the distal portions of the uterine tubes are not encased by this broad ligament. These are actually within the abdomen themselves. There's a communication here between the pelvic cavity and the abdominal cavity. And that's why we can get ectopic pregnancies occurring within the abdominal cavity itself. And it's this opening at the end of the uterine tube, which is known as the abdominal ostium, that connects the lumen of the uterine tube with the intra-abdominal space. Now, the abdominal ostium, you can see, is surrounded by these projections known as fimbriae, and that's one segment of the uterine tubes. It turns out we can split the uterine tubes into 5 different anatomical segments. So let's take away the peritoneum here, open up again the structures, and move them to the side. We can now have a look at the uterine tube in isolation. Now, I said that the uterine tube can be separated into 5 different segments. The first segment is the most distal segment, and it's what's known as the fimbriae. And as you can see, there are multiple different projections that make up this segment, and they extend out towards the ovary. There's generally about 25 projections, and some of them can actually attach to the ovary or flop over the ovary itself. More medial to the fimbriae is this funnel-shaped segment known as the infundibulum. The infundibulum ends or terminates at the abdominal ostium that we looked at earlier. Medial to the infundibulum is a region known, or a segment known as the ampulla. This is the longest segment. It's about half or 2/3 of the entire uterine tube, and its lumen is the widest out of the entire uterine tube. This is generally where fertilization occurs, where the sperm meets the ovum. A small, straight, muscular line segment known as the isthmus is next. That's our fourth segment of the uterine tubes. From the uterine tube that is sitting within the broad ligament, this is the narrowest region of that uterine tube. A very short segment within the muscular wall of the uterus is included in the uterine segments, and that's what's known as the intramural segment of the uterine tube. And this can be narrower than the isthmus itself. It's a dangerous place for ectopic pregnancies to occur because of its relationship with the uterine artery that we're going to look at later. Now, I'm not usually one for mnemonics, but there is a mnemonic here that can help you remember these uterine segments. And the mnemonic is 4 inches across is impossible. And not only do the initial letters of this mnemonic obviously give you a clue as to what the uterine segments are, but it also gives you some information about the length of the uterine tube itself. Generally, on average, the uterine tube is about 4 inches or 10 centimeters long. That is about normal for the uterine tube. Now the mnemonic here, I'll label it here, the fimbriae, infundibulum, ampulla, isthmus, and intramural segments. 4 inches across is impossible. Okay, so that's the uterine tube segments. Let's bring our diagram back together, and now I want to talk about some of the blood supply to the uterine tubes themselves. Now my diagrams are very basic, and I'm going to hand over to a professional, Gray's Anatomy, who has drawn this in some more detail. We're going to start off by looking at the arterial supply, and then we'll look at the venous drainage of these structures. In terms of arterial supply, we've got the uterine artery that is going to head up the lateral aspect of the uterus itself. You can see it's tortuous like this, and it needs to be tortuous because in pregnancy, that vessel needs to expand as the uterus expands, and that allows for that expansion later on. A tubal branch or multiple tubal branches are given off the uterine artery and generally supply arterial blood to the first 2/3 of the uterine tube, the proximal 2/3 of the uterine tube. The distal third of the uterine tube is given off from tubal branches of the ovarian artery. And remember, the ovarian artery comes directly off the abdominal aorta. The uterine artery is coming from the internal iliac artery. In terms of venous drainage, there are 2 venous plexuses involved in the drainage of the uterine tubes. The first is what's known as the pampiniform plexus. It drains blood away from the ovary, and that in itself has been getting blood from the distal third of the uterine tube. That's going to drain into generally 2 veins that unite as one vein, known as the ovarian vein. On the right-hand side, that ovarian vein is going to go into the inferior vena cava. On the left-hand side, that ovarian vein generally goes into the left renal vein. There's a second plexus known as the uterine venous plexus that drains then into the uterine veins. So the uterine artery and ovarian artery supply arterial blood with their tubal branches, and the venous drainage originates at 2 venous plexuses, the pampiniform plexus, the uterine venous plexus, and ultimately blood's taken away in the ovarian vein and the uterine veins. So let's now have a look at some clinical cases. The easiest way to visualize at least the lumen of the uterine tubes is performing what's known as a hysterosalpingogram. And we generally perform this study when we're investigating causes of infertility. So how exactly is this performed? Well, it's a fluoroscopic exam. We're looking at the lumen of the uterus as well as the lumen of the uterine tubes. And what happens is you catheterize the cervical canal with either a Foley's catheter or an HSG catheter, and then water-soluble contrast is injected into the uterine cavity. And the pressure created there causes that contrast to extend out of the uterine cavity into the uterine tubes. And what we want to see is that contrast spilling out into the peritoneal cavity, through the abdominal ostium, out into the peritoneal cavity. So let's have a look at an example here. We've got the catheter. You can see the balloon is blown up here. Contrast is going to be passed through this catheter. It's important to remember that that catheter is primed with contrast first, so we're not injecting air bubbles into the uterine cavity. We want only contrast going in. Notice how contrast is filling the uterine tube on the right, and you can see how thin the lumen of the uterine tube is. As we continue with the study and inject more contrast, we can see the left uterine tube being filled as well, and we can start to see contrast spilling out into the abdominal cavity, the same on the left-hand side as well, until the end of our exam. These are normal uterine tubes. We can look at another case here. We've got a scout image here. Now the contrast in this image is bright. Initially we had an inverted image. The bones were dark, the contrast was dark. Here we've got bright bones, bright contrast. You can see again the balloon and the catheter that has catheterized the cervix. We've got contrast extending out towards the cornu of the uterus, and we can follow as we scroll through now, as we are injecting contrast, we can follow that contrast through the normal uterine tubes on the right hand side and the uterine tube on the left, and we can see that contrast spilling out into the abdomen. So what does it look like if we've got an abnormal HSG? I'm going to take the contrast away here. We can see the catheter. We've got a normal uterine cavity here. Contrast is extending out towards the cornu on either side of the uterus, and we should see contrast filling the uterine tubes. We can see quite nicely on the left here. We've got poor contrast filling on the right hand side. Got contrast spilling out on the left. That spilling is not happening on the right hand side. What we've got is an occlusion of the right uterine tube here, and this was from recurrent cases of pelvic inflammatory disease. So that's hysterosalpingograms. Now let's have a look at what these structures look like on an ultrasound. Here we've got a transvaginal ultrasound, so the probe is within the vagina. We can see a longitudinal axis of the uterus here, the endometrium. The uterus is extending over our probe. If we turn the probe 90 degrees, we can see the transverse through the uterus here, the transverse section of the uterus, and we can use this longitudinal and transverse view to measure the uterus, measure the volume of the uterus here, both on transverse and longitudinal sections. We can also look at the ovaries that are sitting within the adnexa. When you talk about adnexa, we're talking about the ovaries, the uterine tubes, and the broad ligament on either side of the uterus. Now, I said we're not going to see normally the uterine tubes, but we can visualize the ovaries. Here's the left ovary in this patient, and here is the right ovary in this patient. And again, we can measure in the longitudinal and transverse planes to get an idea of the size of those ovaries. Here's a case where you can actually see the uterine tube. This is the cornu of the uterus. This is the abdominal cavity here, and we've got a patient with ascites. They've got cirrhosis and ascites, and that ascites is filling the lower abdominal cavity, and fluid is extending around the fallopian tube itself, or the uterine tube. So this is the ampulla of the fallopian tube, this is the infundibulum, and these are the fimbriae here floating in that acidic fluid. So this is a rare case where you will actually see the uterine tube itself on an ultrasound. Lastly, we're going to look at an MRI. Here's a sagittal T2 weighted MRI of this patient. You can find the bladder anteriorly and the pubic symphysis here. And we can see posteriorly the rectum. Between the bladder and the rectum here, we've got the vaginal canal. Here's the external os of the cervix. We can follow the cervix up into the uterine cavity. And you'll notice that this uterus is retroflexed. It's facing posteriorly. We would expect it to be facing anteriorly, antiflexed over towards the bladder here. So we've got slight antiversion between the vaginal canal and the uterine canal, very slight here, and retroflexion in this uterus. As we scroll out laterally, we should be able to see one of the ovaries come into view. You can see multiple follicles in that ovary. And if we scroll out towards the other side, here's the cornu of the uterus, we should be able to see the second ovary here. We can see that on the axial slices. Remember, our uterus is posteriorly facing here. It's retroflexed. We've got an ovary on the patient's left-hand side here and an ovary on the patient's right-hand side here. And it's difficult to distinguish the normal tubes in this case. So let's then have a look at a case where the uterine tube is visible. There's some pathology in this case. We'll start with an axial T1 weighted image here. What I want to do is scroll down as inferiorly as possible. We know that posteriorly is the rectum. Anterior to the rectum is going to be the vaginal canal, and we can follow that vaginal canal up to the cervix and ultimately find the uterus itself. Now in this case, we can see above the uterus, there's a large, hypointense, distended tubular structure here. If we move over to the T2 weighted scan, find the vaginal canal, go up into the uterus here, we can see on the patient's right-hand side, just above the uterus, this distended tubular structure here. If we give contrast, we can see that this tubular structure is going to have rim enhancement here. The edges of the structure are vividly enhancing. And if we look at our DWI, we see that there's restricted diffusion on DWI. We've got brightness in that tubular structure on DWI. And we need to make sure that that's not T2 shine through and that it's actually true restricted diffusion. So if we go to our ADC, we can see it's dark on the ADC. So this is true diffusion restriction. So we can say from these images that this is likely a pyosalpinx. This is a uterine tube that is filled with pus. And we can distinguish that from a hydrosalpinx, which is a tube filled with fluid, because of the thicker walls here, the inflammatory changes around the tube, the rim enhancement that we get when we give contrast, and the diffusion restriction. This is the case where you can see the uterine tube on the right-hand side here. The left-hand side, the tube is normal and we can't see it. So we're going to leave it there. That's the anatomy of the uterine tubes. Hopefully the diagrams give you a good idea of how we can separate the uterine tubes into their different segments and how the uterine tubes relate to the uterus and the ovary themselves and where they sit in the pelvis. And then we've looked at some normal imaging examples and how we can see those uterine tubes on an HSG. And we've seen that when there's pathology, we may see those uterine tubes on ultrasound and MRI imaging. Otherwise, they're not generally visible in those modalities. That's all we have it for today. I'll see you all in another anatomy session. Until then, goodbye everybody.